Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight, our program is devoted to Professor Stephen Hawking, who died recently at the age of 76, quite possibly the most famous scientist in the world. He was the world-renowned cosmologist, physicist, and author from Cambridge. He was a theoretical physicist, and he did groundbreaking work in a number of areas, including black holes, the formation of the universe, quantum mechanics, and the relationship of time and space. And if you've come here to get an interpretation of his work, boy, you've come to the wrong place. But he's also famous for a couple of other things, including the fact that he lived with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, for over 50 years. That made him one of the longest survivors of this disease. He was wheelchair bound. In later decades, he could only communicate through sophisticated technology assistance, which may have contributed to his work, because he wasn't forced to do lectures and a lot of traveling as part of his job. And at the same time, through his writings and his appearances on television, he became a pop culture figure. Here is BBC News on the death of Stephen Hawking.
He was instantly recognizable and utterly remarkable. The visionary scientist, helpless in his high-tech wheelchair, who nonetheless transformed our view of the universe. While a student, he developed the first signs of motor neuron disease. Gradually, his body shut down, till he could communicate only using a computerized voice synthesizer, controlled to start with by hand. It didn't hold him back.
I was never actually told that I had only 2 years to live, but I could see the doctors didn't think my prospects were good.
His fame sprang from his book, A Brief History of Time. It sold 10 million copies, but though many bought it, rather fewer actually read it. His theories about time, space, and black holes were stupendously difficult for non-specialists to grasp, but he turned out to have a genius for communication. He gave lectures and interviews and became an unlikely celebrity. He even appeared in The Simpsons.
I don't like your tone.
If you are looking for trouble, you found it.
Yeah, just try me, you...
Oh! And on an episode of Star Trek, he played poker with Isaac Newton, his predecessor as Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge.
The day that apple fell on my head was the most momentous day in the history of science.
Not the apple story again.
His private life was complicated. With his first wife, Jane, he had 3 children, and she looked after him, until in 1990 he left her for his nurse, Elaine. They eventually married, only for claims to emerge that Hawking had been physically abused. Police investigated, but the case was dropped for lack of evidence. The couple later divorced.
Too often they are told that these are stupid questions to ask, but this is said by grown-ups who don't know the answers.
He never lost his sense of humour, though by the end he could only speak by twitching his cheek to move an infrared beam.
I don't have much positive to say about motor neuron disease, but it taught me not to pity myself and to get on with what I still could do. I am happier now than before I developed the condition.
If general relativity is correct, then the universe is expanding, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so if you reverse time, then the universe is getting smaller.
All right.
In 2014, his life was dramatised in The Theory of Everything, with Eddie Redmayne playing Hawking.
To see what happened at the beginning of time itself.
Stephen, here you are.
At Cambridge, they unveiled a statue of him, a rare honour for someone still living. But few did more to transform our understanding of the universe and to overcome personal challenges.
Among his great discoveries was that black holes emit a special kind of radiation called Hawking radiation. And as I said, I can't really tell you too much about that. I can comment a little on his amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. There were a couple of reasons that he lived for so long, over 50 years, with the disease. One was there wasn't a particularly rapidly progressing form of the disease, but perhaps more importantly, many people today don't opt for tracheostomies when they have ALS, and Dr. Hawking got a tracheostomy in the 1980s, which allowed the ventilator to breathe for him and allowed him to be suctioned. Most people with ALS die because they're unable to breathe or acquire infections due to pneumonia because they cannot cough. Getting a tracheostomy in the 1980s probably saved his life and gave him 3 more decades of life, and you have to marvel at what he did in those 3 decades. It's a testimony to the fact that more doctors should recommend tracheostomies for their patients with ALS. Here is Matthew Bannister from the BBC4 Last Word on the life of Stephen Hawking.
Professor Stephen Hawking had a brilliant mind trapped in a failing body. His work on black holes and the origins of the universe resonated around the world, even as he had to use an electric wheelchair and a voice synthesizer to express himself. He became a celebrity, appearing in The Simpsons, Star Trek, and The Big Bang Theory. And the eminent cosmologist did experience physical freedom once, when he joined astronauts in training.
In 2007, I was lucky enough to experience microgravity on a zero-G flight. For me, this was true freedom. People who know me well say that my smile was the biggest they'd ever seen. I was Superman for those few minutes.
Stephen Hawking grew up in London and St Albans. He took a first-class degree at Oxford, then moved to Cambridge to carry out research in cosmology. As a teenager, he'd enjoyed horse riding and rowing, but while he was at university, he was diagnosed with a form of motor neuron disease. Doctors gave him no more than 2 to 3 years to live. The Astronomer Royal, Professor Sir Martin Rees, was a contemporary.
I do remember meeting this man who was already walking rather unsteadily with a stick, and I was told that he was someone with the disease, and it wasn't clear he would survive to finish his PhD.
The Big Bang is like a black hole explosion, but on a much larger scale. By finding out how a black hole creates matter, we may discover how the Big Bang created all the matter in the universe.
The physicist and TV presenter Brian Cox explains Stephen Hawking's most influential work.
Black holes, which are the picture of a black hole, a completely collapsed star, is something from which nothing can escape. So you fall in and you're gone forever. But what he showed is that no, they have a temperature. So they radiate away into space, and ultimately it would evaporate away into the universe again. And that's called Hawking radiation. And that idea, if things fall into a black hole, they're not gone from the universe forever. The black hole gives its contents back to the universe eventually, is absolutely fundamental, and that will be a result that's remembered forever.
Einstein's theory of relativity predicts that nothing can travel faster than light.
It's often described as being one of the first windows onto a theory beyond Einstein's theory of gravity, and Hawking radiation is a glimpse, the crack in the door, if you like, through which we might glimpse the new theory.
Why do you think his book, A Brief History of Time, became such an extraordinary phenomenon, an extraordinary sales success?
Well, it was a surprise to him. I mean, he hoped to make enough money to send his 2 eldest children through college, but its success was quite remarkable. I think it was because it was an exciting book and he was already a celebrated figure, and I think the concept of the imprisoned mind roaming the cosmos did strike a chord with a very wide public.
Some decades ago, a well-known scientist, some say it was Bertrand Russell, gave a public lecture on astronomy. He described how the Earth orbits around the Sun and how the Sun, in turn, orbits around the center of a vast collection of stars called our galaxy. At the end of the lecture, a little old lady at the back of the room got up and said, "What you have told us is rubbish. The world is really a flat plate supported on the back of a giant turtle." The scientist gave a superior smile before replying, "What is the turtle standing on?" "You're very clever, young man, very clever," said the old lady, "but it's turtles all the way down."
I wanted to ask you too about the progression of his illness. How did he react to that? Was it something that he found frustrating? Did it provoke anger in him that he was losing his physical prowess even as his mind was working so well?
Well, clearly the diagnosis must have been a tremendous shock to him, but I think when he became reconciled to it, he realized that he could still make a good contribution. But of course, I'm sure he never expected that he was going to live so long at that time. The amazing thing for all through his life has been the fact that he remained surprisingly normal psychologically and interested in many other things outside his work.
It's a question I'm often asked, why has Stephen Hawking lived so long with this disease? And indeed, it's a question he asked me himself one time.
Brian Dickey is head of research at the Motor Neuron Disease Association.
There might have been something in Professor Hawking's genetic makeup that didn't stop the disease from occurring in the first place, but was trying to push back the other way against the disease, so it meant his progression was very, very slow. And this is really beginning to interest researchers.
Professor Hawking, it's an honor and a privilege to meet you, sir.
I know.
He became a celebrity. Did he relish his celebrity, do you think?
I think he did relish it. It was something that obviously was wonderful, because otherwise his life would have been so constricted. But he did travel around the world. You know, he met President Clinton, the Pope, and Obama, and all that. And of course, the largest audience he ever addressed was when he spoke at the opening of the London Paralympics.
People have craved for an understanding of the underlying order of the world. Why it is as it is, and why it exists at all.
You like to party as well, I understand.
That's right, indeed. His 60th birthday was a big junket with can-can dancers and a Marilyn Monroe look-alike and all that. And at the end of the week, he went up in a hot air balloon.
Some people have compared him to Einstein. Was that a comparison that he would have acknowledged?
Well, not quite. He always said he wasn't another Einstein, but the way I'd put it is that he's probably contributed as much as anyone since Einstein to our understanding of gravity.
In 1,000 years' time, they will still be talking about Hawking radiation. They will be using his fundamental results on black holes, plus his contributions to the physics of the very early universe. His work will be remembered as long as there are cosmologists.
We live in a universe governed by rational laws that we can discover and understand. There are many new and deep mysteries that remain for you to solve, and keep a sense of wonder about our vast and complex universe and what makes it exist.
Well, late in life, I thought Dr. Hawking went off the reservation on a couple of topics that weren't in his specialty of cosmology. He was adamant that we had to colonize another planet within the next 200 years or we'd face extinction, and I wasn't crazy about some of his anti-Israel views, especially because Israel made a lot of the equipment that he used to move and communicate with. But what kind of person was he? Well, his Guardian obituary was written by Roger Penrose, who was his colleague at Cambridge in the Institute of Astronomy. Together, the two of them developed a theory that the universe has not always existed. In The Guardian, Roger Penrose wrote, "Despite his terrible physical circumstance, he almost always remained positive about life. He enjoyed his work, the company of other scientists, the arts, the fruits of his fame, his travels. He took great pleasure in children, sometimes entertaining them by swiveling around in his motorized wheelchair. Social issues concerned him. He promoted scientific understanding. He could be generous and was very often witty. On occasion, he could display something of the arrogance that is not uncommon among physicists working at the cutting edge, and he had an autocratic streak. Yet he could also show a true humility that is the mark of greatness." Hawking had many students, some of whom later made significant names for themselves. Yet being a student of his was not easy. He had been known to run his wheelchair over the foot of a student who caused him irritation. His pronouncements carried great authority, but his physical difficulties often caused them to be enigmatic in their brevity. An able colleague might be able to disentangle the intent behind them, but it would be a different matter for an inexperienced student. To such a student, a meeting with Hawking could be a daunting experience. Hawking might ask the student to pursue some obscure route, the reason for which could seem deeply mysterious. Clarification was not available, and the student would be presented with what seemed indeed to be like the revelation of an oracle, something whose truth was not to be questioned, but which, if correctly interpreted and developed, would surely lead onwards to a profound truth. Perhaps we are all left with this impression now. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. It was hard to come up with a closing tribute song to Dr. Hawking. I basically didn't understand almost anything of what he wrote or talked about, but he did talk about and write about time, especially his popular book, A Brief History of Time. So I thought as a final tribute to Dr. Hawking, we'd play my favorite song about time by his fellow Great Britain, actually a Scotsman, Al Stewart, his 1978 song, Time Passages. So Dr. Hawking, if you're out there, this great song is a final tribute to you.
Well, I'm not the kind to live in the past. The years run too short and the days too fast. The things you lean on are things that don't last. Well, it's just now and then my line gets cast into these time passages.